Welcome and thank you for joining us for our Workday Chat today. I'm David Summers, your host for today's discussion. If you have any questions, please share them in the comments below. Today, I'm joined by Phil Chambers, General Manager for Workday Peakon Employee Voice, and Evan Metter, Principal at KPMG. The pandemic and the Great Resignation have made the employee experience a business imperative for companies everywhere. We're excited to have this conversation with you today to explore how businesses can improve the employee experience to meet the evolving needs of the workforce in the changing world of work. To kick things off, let's talk about what the next generation of the employee experience will look like. Historically, the employee experience was focused on bare bones utility and then shifted to a focus on productivity and then engagement. Which priorities are companies honing in on now? Evan, let's start with you.
Hey, David, and thanks for this.
Hey.
I think the next word really is integration. So I was with a group last week talking about the experience, and it used to be when you had a conversation about experience, it was a digital experience or this experience on this process, but we were talking about onboarding. And as we were listening to the pain around onboarding, it was everything from I couldn't get my parking reimbursed, I couldn't figure that out, I had all these forms to do, I couldn't figure out my learning, meeting my team, I didn't meet my manager for months. And so I think the experience piece here is really an integration of the digital experience with the physical real world experience, which is even more important now because things have gotten so much more complicated in terms of when am I in an office, what office am I in, right? Where am I working? And that piece around the socialization that I think everyone took for granted. I'm going to go out to lunch with my coworkers. I'm going to have face-to-face time with my manager. That's not a given anymore. And so I think the full experience has to encompass all of those things, the physical, the digital, and the social. And that's really, that integrated experience is the new horizon.
Great. Phil, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree, Evan. I think you've hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, it's like, how do you even know which day to come in? And if you're commuting in 50 miles and you find out you're talking to the rest of your team on Zoom, does that all feel like a waste of time? I think that leads us really onto this kind of, new world of analytics in the world of hybrid work. As you're trying to figure out, like, are the team productive? And can they still like foster that deeper sense of connection, those social events, that connection to the company and the mission too, if they're not coming into the office as much? I think it's really difficult to get those dynamics right, because hybrid is definitely here to stay. I think most businesses have accepted that, particularly as we've been through multiple, lockdowns and, being let out again. And, firstly, the banks weren't that keen on, they had this big thing about bribing everyone to come back in. But now, I think most organizations have acknowledged that hybrid is here to stay. And they're not going to get it right if they're sort of either forcing people to come back in or sort of bribing people to come back in with gimmicks. So I think that's the big challenge now is how do we make this work, given that this is really the new world of work.
I love that point around the productivity. I feel like in my conversations with our clients a year ago, it was all about how do we know people are working? How do we measure productivity? And then the data played out, right? So we saw that we remained productive, people were working, work was getting done. Then the concern shifted to, but are we creative? Like, are we still collaborating? Are we still innovative? And so I think that, that really is the next piece, which is like, people can kind of keep moving. They can keep pedaling at home. That's been established. We have the data to show us that that's true. Now the question is, for organizations that want to innovate, what is the right mix in the new ways of working in terms of when to be together, when not to be together? How do you utilize these new digital tools, to interact over distance, but still be creative? And how do we foster that creativity? So I think that's how I've seen it shift.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think, defaulting to the old, let's have a meeting when you have, 10, 12 hour Zoom days isn't necessarily the best way to get the creative juices flowing. And I think, you've seen the rise of tools like Miro, digital whiteboarding, where that's extremely collaborative in a mass sense. I think we're going to see many more companies created to solve this problem, because I don't think, this has been completely cracked yet. And we need more tooling in this area.
100%. Go ahead, Evan.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's partially the tech hasn't completely gotten there yet problem, but I think there's a human problem as well. So we have a generation of people who learned how to manage a workforce in a very different context, right? And so everything from career development to career planning to hoarding talent, right? To these are behaviors, being able to check up on someone that I think take longer than we've given it to adjust and need to be done so deliberately. And so one of the things that's been really on my mind is the manager capabilities. And we saw this, right, initially with a rollout of self-service and the idea that we're going to make the tools so good that the managers are going to be able to do them themselves. And to some extent that was true. And for more complex things like succession planning and the career and the coaching elements and the assignment of learning to fill skill gaps, the self-service is there, but the behaviors in terms of the workforce haven't quite caught up to be able to take advantage of the tool set. And so that's the gap I think we need to close. Is there still is a major training and shift in terms of ways of working that is happening and needs to be deliberately guided.
Great conversation, guys. I'm going to move you on to another question or another, I think, important topic as well. The Great Resignation has made employee experience even more critical of an imperative. I think we all know that. Some statistics, more than 24 million Americans quit their jobs between April and September of 2021. That's a lot. And 14 million Europeans exited the labor market altogether. Just saw an article last night stating that also has had a major impact on inflation as well, all of this churn. Employees are our number one core value here at Workday, and we believe that by applying relevant insights and the right resources to understand and improve the employee experience, it's possible for organizations to not only prevent employee turnover, but also to directly impact the ongoing success of their business. We call this potential for growth and uplift the great regeneration. With that context, what are some key actions organizations can take to build a better employee experience? Phil, let's start with you on this one.
Thanks, David. Well, I may be biased giving my background, but of course, I've been banging on about continuous listening for the best part of 7 years now. And I think, back in 2015, when we started Peakon, I think people thought we were absolutely crazy to suggest that you could take anything like a continuous listening approach. But obviously, with engagement, we've proven that not only is it possible, but it's also preferable, and you get some great outcomes. I think what we need to do now is adopt that same continuous listening approach to other topics, such as the aforementioned hybrid working we've been discussing, such as health and well-being. We've seen burnout on the rise, with kind of more video working, and that sense of belonging. With people not coming into the office as much, doing fully remote onboarding, not necessarily ever meeting their colleagues. I've never met you in person, David.
Yeah,
of course
we haven't. Yeah.
Which is completely bizarre, right? I mean, we can't really imagine a world in which you would acquire a company, and you would have 250 people join, and then you haven't actually met any of them. But here we are, 2 years into it, and we're still here. Right. So I think this is going to be another huge period of change, and I think regular feedback is essential, right? And if you think that only 3 to 4 data points a year in some sort of quarterly pulses is enough when you have this amount of change going on, and this amount of you're trying to do, like, pretty much you run your whole business in a different way, and you touched on that sort of presenteeism management, Evan, when we're having to move into a new world where we don't measure performance in that way, then I think we do need to implement that kind of approach. And why are we doing it? Well, we're doing it to deliver meaningful insights ultimately, and get that feedback data back in the hands of execs and managers and employees, in order to course correct, in order to figure out, are these new policies working? Do we have the right tooling? And what do we need to change? What do we need to improve? And what do we need to invest in order to make this work?
I feel like whether it's the Great Resignation or like the Great Rebalancing or the realignment, whatever people are calling it, I actually think it's a good thing. So if you remember back to the history of the United States and you think about what made it strong, it was the movement of labor. We had the most mobility in the country of labor anywhere. People would pick up and move to cities because industries were starting and et cetera. And that was a source of like vibrant thriving, right, in industry and an American workforce. And the idea of mobility between organizations, it doesn't have to be geographic anymore, but between organizations, within an organization, is, in my view, just as critical, right, for a thriving free market of labor to go where they can do their best work. And you talk about experience, David, and Phil, I couldn't agree more. Those analytics are important, not just to be able to say, what do people want and break it down by persona, but the other element of the analytics is we are still lagging, I think, as employers, in general, as an industry, in terms of taking what we know about someone and tailoring the experience. That's just a different application of the analytics, right? But to say, this is unique about you, you're in this persona group, you're this micro persona, I'm going to be able to tailor your digital experience and your physical experience based on what I know about you, because you're not the same, right? We're not treating you all the same. And that being a way that these organizations can respond to becoming places where people can do their best work, right? Because aside from just, a market scan and pay and benchmarking, I think what people really are motivated to do, if you look at the data and you listen to why people are moving, it's because they don't want to do the work that they were doing, right? And they want to be in a place they can do interesting work. They wanted to be able to do their best work. And that's an employee design, that's a work design issue. And I think that the employers who really get that are going to be the huge beneficiaries of this readjustment.
Yeah, I mean, just the opportunity of being able to employ someone from anywhere now, whereas before it was only somewhere you had an office. I mean, that's like a sort of 1,000x increase in your total addressable employee base, and imagine the skills and talents out there and the opportunities that are now being afforded to people who never would have had them. It really is. I love the analogy with the birth of the American Industrial Revolution. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
on one hand, sorry, go ahead, Evan.
I was going to say, there was a complacency. There was a fear of complacency in sclerosis, right? And while it is disruptive and it has put a lot of employers kind of off balance and it's acutely painful, I feel like the thing to do right now is to lean into the moment and be able to accelerate the change, right? If you're an employer who's trying to get back to 2019, you are going to lose, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's interesting. You made a great point, Phil, too. I think the places and the ability for folks to go find new talent has increased 1,000-fold, which is, fantastic. On the flip side of that, everybody's hunting for the same talent today. And so it's gotten tougher and tougher, which is why I think we're seeing a lot of folks, kind of move around. I think it also highlights the need for any organization to really, really focus on understanding their people, understanding the skill sets that those folks have, understanding what gaps they have and where they're going as an organization. And, I've told many of our customers this: you're not going to recruit your way out of this anymore. You're going to have a much more sophisticated strategy that involves actually upskilling or reskilling folks to meet your talent demands.
We're seeing that, and the point about learning, right? You always have the build, buy, borrow decision. And I guess it's changed, right? To build, buy, borrow, bot, and base. There's two more B's in the equation. But the build piece is really interesting because how did people used to learn, right? Yes, you had on-the-job training, but then you had formal learning in classrooms and et cetera. And in a lot of the organizations that we serve at KPMG, we're seeing a major shift to, well, how do people learn now, and putting learning in the flow of work, right? So if you have something break in your house, we did a plumbing project over the weekend, we looked it up on YouTube, right? And we learned in the moment, at the time of need, very specific things. And that's where we've been shifting a lot of our client organizations in terms of how do they help build those skills, not in a formal get in the classroom mode anymore, but in terms of time of need, small bites, and learning in the flow of the work. And that's a major shift for a lot of organizations.
100%. And, that's a really good key point. I've got 3 young kids, and, they just natively learn that way now. Like, that's natural to them. And I think that's what we're dealing with in the workforce today and in the future. So great point, Evan. All right, let's shift slightly here. I want to focus on our discussion on what I think is, a key demographic, and that's the frontline workforce. The past 2 years have posed considerable challenges, stress, and burnout, especially for the frontline workers. How can businesses elevate the employee experience for the frontline workforce to ensure employees feel supported and engaged? Once again, Phil, I'll start with you again on this one.
I think it goes back to a lot of what we've just been talking about. This is really, a big part of why people are moving is about growth, right? And if we think about how we help people restart their career journeys with a focus on learning, development, and mentoring, they've just been kind of getting by for the past 2 years, and not necessarily been invested in themselves. I think that's going to go a really long way. I think execs need to remember, the tone of their communications. You shouldn't be thankful, go from being thankful one day to now being suspicious as people settle into these new hybrid working patterns or post-COVID working patterns. And you need to understand as an exec that, diversity, inclusion, health and well-being are no longer just, policies handed down or a comms exercise. Inclusive behavior, building sense of belonging, being conscious of people's well-being, particularly in the hybrid world of work. That's an expectation that we need to have from sort of leaders at all levels in the organization. And, therefore we need to be upskilling those leaders on how they're going to deliver on that expectation to these frontline workers in this new world of work. And we shouldn't just expect that to happen, I don't think.
I agree with that. I mean, David and Phil, you guys are in important roles at Workday, and you've got a collection of skills that you've grown over decades, right? And you're using some of them right now, but there are some that maybe are in your past. And I think that the workforce wants to be understood as a collection of skills and not as a job title, right? Not as a role that I'm in now, right? And the employers who can really start changing over that currency. And when you think about it, job codes, job profiles, titles. This is a currency of the last century, right? And we're in a new century now. We're well into it. And it's really about what are the skills and competencies that I have, and how are you helping me shape a career here so I don't have to leave, but not just thinking about me as my current job, right? And what skills am I acquiring? That's a more granular currency. I admit that the systems and the technology that we had in the last century could not have handled that, right, currency. But as we're switching over this, and we've got great tooling now, we need to make the mental shift to you're not your job code. And the workforce is a collection of skills, and you have important people that can contribute to your business strategy and that you can grow inside your organization if you can see them, right? And if you can see the skills that are there. And so that's a major shift, David and Phil, that I think goes in line with the listening and the analytics piece, because if we can then apply it to the skill groups, right, versus just the job profiles, there's a lot more power in that.
Yep. When I think of the frontline workforce specifically as well, I mean, I think about all of the technology and even both software and hardware that's been created over the past, call it 5-10 years. Most of that has not been created for that particular part of the workforce. And I think it's a huge opportunity for organizations to really start to focus on those folks. I think we've seen just how important those folks are, given the pandemic that we've just gone through. And I think, smart organizations are going to start to focus on, the actual technology and, capability and experience and things like even benefits and, all of those types of things for that particular demographic that, you go and you look and they're missing in many cases today. It's not easy for those folks to do what they need to do, right? So I think a smart, the smart organizations that leverage those types of folks are going to really focus on that experience for them.
It's a great example of that is salespeople. So there's a lot of transformation happening in sales because one, people don't have as much time, right? If they're with you physically, they want to really limit that now. There's not a whole lot of there's not a lot of golf meetings anymore. And the onus, whether you're selling, you're in a bank and you're a commercial banker, or you're in insurance, or you're in some other you're selling cars, it's there's the expectation of you have the information, you know something about me, and you can serve me. The expectations around that have gone way up, and combined with the supply chain challenges for some goods, that area is one to watch in terms of sales skills, the frontline worker, in terms of how do I sell in a different environment with different expectations, is a huge area of change. And I think, to your point, David, how do you think about their experience? It's about giving those people information about the customer. It's about giving them information about the product, the services. You have to know a lot more and be ready to serve, right, in those roles than I think you did previously.
Yeah, and I mean, their job's hard enough. I think you can't expect these folks to have to go to 15 different places to do their job, right? I think making that experience, there's been a lot of focus on making the experience for the white collar worker, seamless, if you will. I think that same level of effort needs to be applied towards the frontline workforce as well. All right. So with that, let's jump into, here's your chance to be bold, gentlemen. Last question. What is your top prediction for the future of work? And this time, Evan, we're going to start with you.
Well, I think it's obvious that hybrid's here to stay, right? And so I think the prediction is going to be, everyone's waiting for it to let off and kind of get back to something that's normal. And what I am anticipating is it's not going to be that way. We're going to see a continuous relooking at org models, at changes. The automation is going to come in, right? We were all ready for it, and that's going to come in and be another disruptor. So unfortunately, I don't think that there is a huge gulf of respite here, right, in the coming months or year for employers or for the workforce. I think it's going to be continuously, ratcheting up, and the next disruption with hybrid. And so organizations really do need to be investing in these areas we talked about, learning in the flow of work, looking at skills, using the analytics, and listening, because it's not going to ease off. That's my prediction.
Great. Phil, you want to follow that up?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, Evan. I don't think it's going to let up. I would go maybe even to make one more prediction, is that I think in sort of 5 years' time, that we'll see the end of business travel. I think it's going to be increasingly sort of frowned upon for, getting a whole team to be jetting around the world for 2-day events. And we're going to see the rise of technologies like AR and VR, like the fabled metaverse, to provide kind of more immersive work experience that are closer to actually being in an office, but where people are distributed, and where you can actually have, at the moment, everybody I think probably despises going to virtual, multi-day events, because, effectively it's like sitting in, a 24-hour meeting or something like that. But I do think that we have, with gaming type technology, we do have the possibility to make these things much closer to what it really would be like. And I think, I think we will see that well within our working lifetimes, maybe even sooner.
That's a great prediction. All right, I'll try to follow that up as well. And it actually, my prediction plays on something, Evan, you mentioned earlier. I would say the not too distant future, I think jobs as we define them today will be non-existent. I feel like most organizations by that time will have moved on, because we have the technology to do it, into you as a individual, an employee, you bring a set of skills to your employer, and you don't have a specific job or role. You are leveraged based on your skill set to, work on specific types of projects or missions or whatever, terminology the organization leverages. But they really start to use their workforce more efficiently, because they understand the collection of skills at that granular level versus at a job level. Which also leads to things like the ability to start having multiple companies use and share resources as well, which is also something that I think is going to happen in the not too distant future. So there's three hopefully bold predictions for everybody listening. And with that, I would like to wrap it up and thank you for sharing your insights, both of you. I really appreciate your time today. And for everybody else out there, join us again for our next episode of Workday Chats. Thanks, everybody.